You know, we're a very symbolic religion. And just look around the sanctuary, you'll see symbols for everything. And we have symbolic actions as well. And I remember the time when there were guests in my congregation, and they were being told, what does this mean, what does this mean, what does this mean? And then I began to speak, and I took off my watch, and I put it down like this, and I heard someone say in the congregation, well, what does that mean? And the answer was, it doesn't mean anything. And we'll continue with Musaf. Okay, so what was Korach's big sin? Bum, 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 bum. He was out for himself. How do we know that? Right, you read it in the commentary, right? Right. No, that's great. You were reading the commentary. But let me tell you something about the commentary. It's commentary. It's the opinion of the person. And sometimes the commentary is meant to take you into a different place. Because commentators are also political. So, by the way, are translators. But we'll get into that as we go through the year. But that's the commentary. And whenever I read a commentary and I look at it, and then I look at the text, and the text doesn't necessarily say that. So therefore, I wonder, why is that commentary? And by the way, that commentary comes from Pirkei Avot, which is from Ethics of the Ancestors, which says you should all be like Aaron, who I think the text says, you should all be like Aaron, pursuers of peace. And you should not be like anyone who's not a pursuer of peace. So who is an example? I'm sorry. The text actually is discussions and arguments in our tradition will never be determined. That will never be determined are considered holy. Those that will be determined or are ego-laden will be resolved and are not from God. So the question then, the text then says, what is an example of something, of a discussion that is in the name of God that will never be determined, that will never be resolved? And that is, the answer is from Hillel and Shammai, the differences. And what is the difference of opinion that is not divine and that will be resolved? And that's Korach. So that's actually where that commentary comes from. But that's not Korach's sin according to the text. He has two problems. And in order to illustrate what those problems are, I have to ask you this question, which is, the most important event in the Torah takes place outside of the Torah. And now the question, what is the worst sin committed by the children of Israel in the wilderness? The golden calf, right? What was the punishment? I'll tell you, about 3,000 people got killed and they had to drink the soda water, from the golden calf. Okay, that's it. What was the worst punishment meted out to the children of Israel? 40 years in the wilderness. So, according to some modern scholars, David Hartman, you can't say the golden calf was the worst sin, because the punishment was nothing compared to the sin of the refusal to go to the state of Israel. If the punishment for refusing to go to the Holy Land was that the entire generation was going to die out, and the punishment for the golden calf was just that 3,000 people got schmeist, which, by the way, is a technical term, if that's the case, then by deduction, the worst sin of the Israelites was refusing to go to the Holy Land. And the most important event that occurs in the Torah doesn't occur in the Torah, and that is the entry into the land of Israel, because that takes place right after the Torah finishes. So Korach's first sin was that he turned to Moses and said, I don't want, and we don't want, to go to the Holy Land. And then do you remember how he refers to the land of Egypt? The land of milk and honey. Okay, let me tell you, when we talked about organized religion before, land of milk and honey, as an aside, what milk and what honey? It was date honey. Why isn't it bee honey, by the way? Does anyone know? Bees had not yet been, in this time, bees had not yet been domesticated enough to create honey in that type of way. So it had to be date honey. What kind of milk? I'll give you a hint, it wasn't cows. It's goat's milk. Where do goats live? Mountains. So what does the land of milk and honey really mean? A land of date honey and mountainous and goat's milk. That is not a fertile land. But we'll come back to that. That said, the first sin of Korach, simply put, is that he didn't want to go to the Holy Land. And then he reverses everything and says that Egypt is the land of milk and honey and not Israel. And that is not acceptable. There was another sin as well. When Moses asks Korach to come and talk to him personally, Korach refuses. And he openly disrespects the leader of Israel. And those two things together are what seal his fate. And notice, by the way, that Moses doesn't ask God to get rid of Korach. Moses turns to the Israelites and says, if he dies the way regular people die, then I am not your leader. But if he dies in a way that you've never seen before, which is the earth is going to open up and swallow him whole, then you'll know that I was chosen. Moses challenges God to do what Moses wanted to get rid of Korach. So two of the things we learn from Korach are that it is not an acceptable action. It is a grievous sin to show disrespect to authority and to the legitimate authority. And secondly, that not going to the land of Israel or not wanting to enter the Holy Land is the greatest sin that the Israelites performed when they were in the wilderness. Now we come back to your answer, which was, it was ego-driven. Why do you think the rabbis turned that around and made it a more ego-personal thing with Korach? They almost completely disregard the concept of entering the land of Israel. Anyone have an idea? And that would be today. But let's go back 2,000 years. What was going on in the state of Israel 2,000 years ago? The Roman Empire. There was no independence. It had been, the Jewish state was destroyed. And the rabbis consciously, we see this in the Talmudic texts, consciously move away from the concept of Israel being the Holy Land. In fact, in other words, it becomes an ideal to realize in the future when the Mashiach comes. But since the reality was it wasn't there, and it wasn't then, and it wasn't present, they begin to turn away and create the concept of the Jewish community, which we live with today, which is arguably the most powerful force in our lives, which is our concept of community. And so what ended up happening in the late 1800s with the rebirth of actual Zionism, where the Jews could actually go back and live in Israel, what ended up happening was we had to re-find Israel as being the center of our lives. And we've done a pretty good job of it so far, and may it always be that way.